Ah, coffee. What is better than coffee? Folks, welcome to the Training Cafe. Eric Hurst here. And I think we're going to make this a Monday ritual, at least when I'm available. And hopefully, when you're available, we can meet up like this, sip coffee together simultaneously on a worldwide basis. How cool is that? And talk training, talk climbing. And what could be better than training, climbing, and coffee? It's a tough question to answer. Well, maybe not. The answer is nothing is better than that. So let's sip together and let's get rolling here with Training Cafe number 21. Thanks for joining in, whether you're on the Facebook Training for Climbing page, viewing the live stream, or here on YouTube. I believe you can type in comments and they will come through on my interface here. And hopefully you are getting audio. Can someone give me a thumbs up that audio is working? And I believe it is. So we will proceed onward. First thing I try to do here is to give a shout out to a worthy climber or other individual that has impressed me or done something remarkable. And this time around, got 3 shout outs. The first one, simple, obvious. It's happy birthday to my young son, Jonathan, formerly known as Mini-Me, because he kind of looks a little like me, but he's not mini anymore. He's actually bigger, stronger, and basically better at everything than his dad. So happy 18th birthday to Jonathan. Second shout out to Drew Ruana, a 20-year-old American climber who just this past weekend sent his 3rd V16 boulder route of the year. In January, he did Sleepwalker at Red Rocks. He then did box therapy, the second ascent of box therapy, a really hard route up in Rocky Mountain National Park, a Daniel Woods route established like a decade ago. So hard it hasn't been repeated in nearly a decade. And then this past weekend, Creature from the Black Lagoon also coming in around V16. So that is hard bouldering to do 3 of those in a season. Has that been done before? I don't follow the bouldering statistics that closely. It probably has been, but it's got to be a rare feat, especially here in the United States. So kudos to Drew. And also this weekend up at the park, Brooke Rabatou, America's first Olympian, though it's been delayed a year. Brooke sent Jade V14, and then another really hard V13 that I forget the name of. So Brooke is climbing strong. So I guess if you can't be at the Olympics here this summer, or I guess it would be over by now in July, you might as well be up in the park crushing like Brooke is. And the Olympics will still be in her future here soon. So congrats to Brooke and good luck to Brooke. On we go. Before we get to your questions, and I'll try to answer as many as I can here in about the next 30 or 40 minutes. I do have another phone consult at 1, so I need to get out of here promptly, and so I won't be late for that commitment. I wanted to, before I get to the questions, just give you a little bit of insight into my experience. As you know, if you followed the last couple of training cafes, I was on a road trip after being in the COVID lockdown all spring season and not really climbing, just training. Got to go out into some remote areas in Wyoming and Idaho and Montana and do some climbing with my wife and at times with my kids this summer, and had a really nice trip, climbed well, and returned home. And as a veteran climber, I am well aware you return home weaker than you began the trip, because you do this training block, you hopefully do everything right and peak for the trip, which I think I talked about that maybe 3 training cafes ago, about how to peak your training to kind of set you up to climb your best on a road trip. You're at that peak, you're highly motivated, you climb hard your first few weeks, hopefully, of your trip, because everything's lined up. But then as the trip wears on, each week you are removed from your strength training like hangboarding and your power training like campusing and maybe your hard bouldering or moon boarding, tension boarding, every week you're removed from that type of training, especially if you're out route climbing, as I do mostly on road trips. You are losing your high-end strength and power. And it can be kind of masked because you're fatigued on the trip and maybe not eating as well as you would be at home in a training situation. And also you tend to gain endurance. If you're out on a road trip for several weeks and climbing, say 4 days a week, your body is adapting in ways that you're actually improving endurance. And that can kind of mask the loss of high-end strength and power that is only called upon maybe on the crux moves, the hardest moves, a few times a day or a few moves on a route. But the fact is you are slowly losing that as you're on a long extended trip. A lot of pros will limit their trips. I've mentioned before, Alex Megos, he did bibliography. It took him 60 days of effort, but that wasn't 60 days spread over like 3 months. That was 60 days spread over 3 years. And he would come to Seus and maybe put in 10 days on the route and then go home and train or something like that. Because, a route like that, you need, 515D, 9C, the world's second route of that grade. He needs to be peak strength and power. And so after a couple of weeks there working on a route like that, you don't have it anymore. So you need to go home, get it back, maybe try to add a few percent to it, and then come back and work on it some more. So in any case, long story short, when I got home, I did take about a 4-day rest break that involved my travel home and then the next couple of days at home, just kind of catching up on sleep and letting my body, catch up from what was basically 2-month road trip. And then my first 2 workouts after that 4-day break were relatively light, just kind of easing back into things, doing some submaximal climbing like on the tread wall and some easy bouldering and some simple, basic submaximal hangboarding and pull-ups, just to kind of get my body, going again and assess. I had a little bit of pain in my elbow at times on the trip. So I kind of wanted to assess that. Is that something that needs a more extended rest? And I think the answer is no, because the problem isn't really there anymore. So 4 days rest, then kind of a 2-day ease back into training, nothing hard, nothing maximal to evaluate, and then another day or 2 off. So that's kind of a week, or 8 days. And now I'm ready, or a couple days ago, I was ready to begin my next training block. And so I began that training block by doing some strength testing. And I just wanted to share with you the results of that because it gives you a sense in the drop off in my strength and power from my last workout, where I tested myself before going on my trip at the beginning of June. And now here after an 8-week road trip and then kind of 1 week of rest and recovery, how much did I lose? And so the one I want to share with you is when I do max hangs, the protocol I use is one I developed years ago, and it's in my training for climbing book. It's the 753 protocol, where after an extensive warm-up, you do a 7-second hang with weight added, and you add as much weight as you can so that maybe you could hang on for an 8th or 9th second. So it's not quite failure at 7 seconds, but it's close to that. So you 7-second hang, 53-second rest, 7-second hang, 53-second rest, 7-second hang, and then about a 3 to 5 minute rest. So the set is actually 3 hangs, 3 7-second hangs with 53 seconds in between. So it's incomplete recovery between the 3 hangs. Really good max strength protocol. You need to do a 5-minute rest, and then you can do another couple of sets of that. For most people, if you're training on a 20 millimeter edge or something like that, or on first pad pockets, you'll likely have to add weight. If you're new to this, maybe you have to remove weight from your body, but that's just something you have to figure out. get it personalized just right. For me, my testing before I left for the trip, I kind of, did a full workout and kind of sussed out what is the max weight I could do for that protocol. And the answer before my trip was 100 pounds. So that's 100 pounds added to a loading pin hanging from the belay loop of my harness. And I train on a 14 millimeter edge, transgression edge, which I kind of prefer that. If I did a 20 millimeter edge, I'd have to add way too much weight. Maybe I'd have to add 140 pounds. It just gets ridiculous. 100 pounds is about, in my opinion, the limit. And then you need to kind of shift to one arm training, which really strong climbers will do instead for the 753 protocol. But in any case, I was able to do 100 pounds for a set of those 3 hangs, 3 7-second hangs before the trip. Coming home, and it's kind of shocking, but after my kind of rest week, I did a strength workout and tested myself. And I started at 60 pounds added to the loading pin. And I was able to do the 3 7-second hangs using the 753 protocol. Then I rested 5 minutes and took it up 10 pounds. And I was just barely able to do, with 70 pounds total, the 3 7-second hangs. In fact, I think on the third hang, I kind of failed at about 6 seconds. So I didn't even quite make it to the 7-second goal. So that was my limit, was 70 pounds after the trip. Before the trip, it was 100 pounds added. So you might be thinking, doing the math, wow, that's a 30% drop in weight. Well, yes, it's a 30% drop in weight added, but it's not a strength loss of 30%. Because my body is also hanging on that edge. So you have to, the way you want to calculate these things is, I weigh 160 pounds, my body. And then before the trip, I was adding 100 to that. So that's 260 pounds total on that 14 millimeter edge for 7-second hang times 3. After the trip, 70 pounds added to my body. So that's 230 pounds total hanging on that edge for 7 seconds times 3. So if you do the math, it's more like a 12% drop in maximum finger strength, which is still significant, obviously. A 12% drop is pretty big. Here's the good news. When you are faced with this situation, going on a trip or maybe an injury layoff where you have to just stop training, maybe a finger injury or a little tweak in your elbow or shoulder, you need to take a month off from serious training, just do rehab. You will similarly, lose maximum strength. The beauty is it comes back way fast. Okay, so I've spent, the whole spring season training to get up to that 100-pound limit. Now I'll have to check back and let you know, but my bet is I will gain that back, that lost 12%, and be back to near 100 pounds added weight for my weighted hangs in 4, maybe 5 workouts. And I do, by the way, 2 max strength workouts per week. So I'm thinking just 2 or 3 weeks, I should get my high-end strength back. People talk about muscle memory. It's not really the muscle that has the memory, but it's the myonuclear domain. As you do training over many seasons and years, you change, the cell's programming. The myonuclei domain expands and has a memory that snaps back quickly. And so it's always easier to get back to maximum strength. You can get back way faster than what it took you to get it in the first place. And so that's why a training progression, as long as you don't get injured, season over season or training block over training block, should be kind of one of these uphill climbs where you gain strength, consolidate, maybe drop off a little bit, and then gain more, consolidate, drop off a little bit. Now, at my age, I'm 56, almost 57. Your body is trying to shut down. There's something called sarcopenia. And as you get older, you lose strength and power, and eventually aerobic capacity. I mean, your body resists. I guess it's a self-preservation type thing to some degree, helping you avoid getting injured. But in any case, as you go through your 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s, you're not going up anymore. For me, it's kind of fighting a battle to every year try to maintain where I was the year before. And so that's where I'm at in my life. Hopefully, I imagine most of you watching are younger than me, and you can keep that uphill climb going as long as you don't get injured, right? Now, injuries happen in climbing, outdoors, but training, you don't want to get injured training. So be smart there. Remember the number one rule of Eric's Train Club: don't get injured training, right? So, outdoor climbing, things happen, shit happens. But if you're smart, take enough rest days, consume enough nutrition. I talked about that in the last video. You can hopefully avoid injury. Okay, well, I've talked enough here, and I want to move on to taking some training questions. There's one lingering question from the last episode that I wanted to answer. Gio asked me. He's now back climbing outside. His focus is long multi-pitch routes. So he does that type of climbing 2 days per week. That his schedule and his recovery allows him, he says, to train 1 day per week. So what exactly should he do in that scenario of climbing outside more multi-pitch long routes? And because of that, sub-maximal routes. You don't push yourself the same way doing that as you do if you're into bouldering or hard sport climbing. And so his 2 days per week out doing long trad routes is really good for the aerobic energy system, building a very strong aerobic system that if he's doing that twice a week long term, really develops a lot of capacity. So that training day should focus on maximum strength and maybe even some power endurance. And if possible, then somebody just commented, "This guy is the Bill Nye of climbing education." Wow. I hope that's a compliment. I guess so. But one day per week of maximum strength training would be great. Hangboard training, maybe something just like what I was talking about. Do a long warm up, a 30-minute warm up, and then really test yourself and do some heavy hangs, some weighted pull-ups, maybe dabble in a little bit of campusing, though. Again, you got to be ready for that, or the campus board turns into the injury board. So be cautious there. And one thing I would propose is maybe on that one training day, do a split workout where you warm up and in the morning or midday do your hangboarding. So you can maybe do that whole workout in an hour to an hour and a half. Your hangboarding, your weighted pull-ups, that type of stuff. And then the afternoon session, maybe do some bouldering, or if you have access to a climbing gym, do a little bit of roped climbing, but the focus being more single pitch, pushing yourself, getting pumped. So more anaerobic lactic energy system focus. And maybe, if you do that double workout on one day, maybe then a fourth day, you could even throw in a little bit of push muscle training, rotator cuff training, some Ys and Ts, things to maintain balance. Because, climbing long trad routes outside or multi-pitch routes outside exposes you to lots of different movement patterns, with jam crack climbing and finger jamming. Your shoulders are torquing in different ways, a little different from sport climbing. And so, the shoulders really get worked for sure. So doing things to maintain shoulder health is important. I think all climbers should do a day or two of that type of prehab, as it's often called. So hopefully that helps you out there, Gio. Okay, let me see a bunch of questions typed in here. Let me scroll up and just see if I can run through these in order. Jammer RO asks about CBD oil use. I have not personally used CBD. I know some athletes who have used it, both as kind of transdermal creams that rub on, which it's debatable how much crosses, the barrier into your muscles and into the active tissues below your muscles. So a little bit skeptical there. CBD oils that are consumed potentially get around that hurdle and could be more effective. It's not something I'm against. If you're a competitive athlete, you need to know if that might present drug testing issues for you. And I guess the big thing that, because I've done a lot of research on the topic, is how are you really getting what's on the label of the cream or the CBD oil? There's obviously no oversight. Much like the supplement industry, there's poor oversight on concentration and well, I guess I read an article recently where they tested 10 or 20 CBD products from a variety of companies, and I think one of the products actually tested at above the concentration that was on the label, and one or two were within 20%, so between 80 and 100% of what was on the label was in the product. And 7 of the 10 were very low and perhaps only trace amounts of CBD in there. So that study, now granted, it was just, maybe a dozen or so products. It does kind of reveal that you might not be getting what you think you're getting. And so you need to do your research, probably testing out the CBD oil for yourself and determining whether it's beneficial or not, using it regularly for a month. That's a study of N equals 1, but it's, a very personalized study, and maybe it will help you. I tell people when it comes to using our supercharged collagen by PhysiVantage, do the same thing. I know the research is 100% legitimate. I designed supercharged collagen to be totally unique and novel, and it's far more biologically active than the generic, what I call junk collagens that are out there, which is most of what you find on Amazon, let's say. They aren't even complete proteins. And we have value added to the collagen peptides in a way to make it more active. We've added leucine, we've added tryptophan. It is a complete protein. It does kind of give you that leucine trigger to get protein synthesis started. And then we know the research on the collagen peptides, if you consume them, especially before training or before rehab, it gets into the joints that you activate and the tissues you activate. But if somebody tries it for a month, they'll the proof is in the pudding most of the time. I hear back from the customers and like, my God, my pulley injury or my knuckle injury or my knee pain or whatever their ailment is, most people responds in a positive way when the collagen is taken daily. And so maybe you need to do the same type of N equals 1 test with the CBD oil. So there's a long answer to a short question. Ben says he has a grade 1 A3 pulley injury, middle finger. How much time to take off from climbing specific training? The A3 pulley is the one that's right under the PIP joint. It's less frequently injured than the A4 and the A2, and you can probably tape right over the joint and give a little bit of support to it. Taping doesn't give much support. If you get a good non-stretchy loical tape and tape it on top of that, right on top of the fold, it might give it some support so you can ease back into training more quickly. But that sounds like an injury that if you're cautious, you should be able to work through in a month or so. I would, if it's a fresh injury, take a week off until there's no swelling, until there's minimal pain to the touch. And then with taping kind of for awareness and maybe a little bit of support, ease back into some submaximal hangs. I would stay away from climbing because it's too tempting to grab crimps. But when you do go back to climbing, focus on big holds and open hand holds and kind of ease back in over a 2 to 4 week period. And again, if you couple your training and climbing with something like supercharged collagen, that supports the collagen synthesis process and the loading of the tendon combined with the collagen peptides getting into your bloodstream as you're loading, there's a synergy there to help you work through the process. Okay, moving on here. Is it possible to train effectively outdoors, access to a nearby crag that contains a few moderate sport climbs and boulders? Yeah, so I mean, you're talking about it's kind of like a little bit of an outdoor climbing gym. It's got some moderate sport routes. It's got a few boulders. I mean, the downside is it's not climate controlled like the climbing gym is. It never rains in a climbing gym. The crag, obviously, you're at the mercy of the weather conditions a little bit. And also, crag climbing isn't as quite user friendly. The holds might be sharper than gym holds. And so, I mean, I think ultimately for most climbers, it's a blend of outdoor climbing and indoor training is the ultimate in training. Because climbing is so specific that if you just train indoors and then only infrequently go outdoors, though you may be strong, the nuance of climbing outdoors is lost if you're not doing it regularly. So what you're proposing is great. I mean, that's better than nothing, but I think I would try to add a day of indoor climbing or a day of hangboarding or something like that to those outdoor climbing days. Again, when you're climbing routes outdoors, though you may be getting pumped, you're probably not doing a lot of maximal moves. Whereas you can get on a hangboard and very easily target, peak finger force, or get on a campus board and target peak power. And so again, the blend of outdoor and indoor climbing is the ultimate. It's got to be structured properly, and that's where you can become a good self-coach and do that, or you can engage a professional coach to help you out. Yes, Nicholas says Drew. Yes, Drew is a beast. Certainly having a world class season, 3 V16s. And you know what? With routes that have only been repeated a few times, you can always argue, well, it's a consensus of 2 or it's a consensus of 4. Maybe a few years from now, a few more ascents, the grade will soften up. Even if this grade softened up, it's still 3 V15s in a season would be incredible. But these routes are all legit. Box therapy was unrepeated until Drew did it. Sleepwalker has been done, I think, maybe 4 times, but it takes people like weeks to repeat the route. The few people that have done it, I think it took Drew 10 or 12 days to do Sleepwalker. And my son kind of felt the starting holds when he was out there with Drew last winter, and said just doing the first move, just pulling your butt off the ground on the undercling of Sleepwalker is like V12 or something like that. Really, really hard to get off the ground, or V10. And so people look at a video and say, that looks easy. I could do that. But, until you touch the holds and try it, you don't really get how ridiculously hard these things are. V16 is just unimaginable for me, of course. The ship has sailed on me having a chance to do that, but I am still psyched to be climbing pretty hard for my age, and I will keep climbing and hopefully keep doing training cafes for many years to come, as long as you guys are enjoying it and learning from it. My goal, I sent out an email this morning to my PhysiVantage customer list. I'm just going to go off on a little tangent here. Yes, I'm in the coaching business and I'm in the performance nutrition business with my company PhysiVantage. And I am an author of 8 books with many foreign translations. And so that's how I make my living, is from these different projects. But I started all this and I do all this and I'm energized to do all this. First and foremost, to share my love for climbing, my passion for climbing, to educate and motivate and inspire. And I know it works. I hear back from a lot of people, and the feedback keeps me going and lets me know that what I'm doing has value and is valued. And I've, over the years, heard from climbers in over 50 countries who have read my books. So to know my ideas and my coaching have spread through my books and now through the internet and through videos like this to climbers in over 50 countries is pretty crazy. Climbing is still kind of a small sport, but it has a global reach, and most important, it brings people together. So politics and religion and age and, gender and, any other subjective or objective things that are drawn to divide us don't really matter. You put a group of climbers together and we share a passion for something that brings us together. It's a beautiful thing. Okay, end tangent. Back to the questions here. Okay, Fabio says, greetings from Italy. Hey, Fabio. Yeah, I mean, vegans can, with a lot of attention to detail, eat a very healthy diet and get enough protein. But, if your source of proteins is not animal products, you are shortchanging yourself. Or it's, how do I put it carefully? The branched chain amino acids that are so important for muscle protein synthesis post-workout. And then the 3 amino acids that are so important for collagen synthesis, glycine, proline, and hydroxyproline. Those are amino acids not found in high amounts in vegan products. And so you have to be really savvy to put together a diet that will get you what you need to stay healthy and strong and recover appropriately. So to answer your question, I mean, there are some supplement products out there, like pea protein is a really good protein that if you, we make a vegan protein, Physivantage, it's called Powerplex, and it's a blend of organic pea protein and organic brown rice protein. We blended them together and also added some glycine to it. So we've adjusted the amino acid spectrum to make it ideal for hard training athletes like climbers. So if you haven't already, if you're a vegan climber, check out the Powerplex product. Jonathan Segrist, who's America's top sport climber, 515B climber, uses it daily as his source of protein. And so you could consume something like that just before or just after your workout to support, your tendons and ligaments and your muscle recovery post-workout. That would be ideal. In terms of consuming things, a vegan protein bar, like a Builder's Bar type product, might be useful before or during your workout. Again, a lot of those products have a lot of soy, which in my stomach doesn't work for me. It tends to make me gassy. And so I'm not a big fan of soy myself. I favor more the pea protein type vegan products. How often do you take time off from training or climbing throughout the year? For me, around Christmas, I dial things back and I recommend a lot of people maybe consider taking the Christmas holidays or Thanksgiving holiday. If your outdoor climbing season is kind of wrapped up, to take a week or two off where you can go to parties and be with friends and family and eat and not worry about calories. And yes, maybe put on a few pounds, but who cares if you're out of your performance season and you're between training blocks. I think at least 2 weeks, maybe as much as 3 or 4 weeks, no longer than that. You don't want to be away from your training much longer than that, or you do backtrack. And like I said earlier, you get back strength and power quickly, but you also lose endurance. So I am against just going off climbing and training for more than a 2 to 4 week spell. And even then, I think you want to stay active, doing some jogging, some running, or maybe cross-train, do some skiing or some other activity so that you are still burning calories and staying active. And maybe even do some easy climbing one day a week during that break. But I do think it is beneficial physically and mentally to have kind of that little bit of an off season. And so, you go from, your performance season to maybe a brief rest of a few days to a few weeks, and then you go into a hard, maybe 10 or 12 week training block during the winter that then sets you up for your spring season. And then maybe you have a few shorter performance and training blocks during the climbing year before you get back to the next winter season. So you might try to set something up like that. Next question, he's heard about dairy products being inflammatory. Do I agree with this? Well, not for me, they're not. Now, there are issues, there's a percent of the population that can't metabolize lactose that is found in milk, for instance, and whey concentrate proteins have lactose in them and can cause upset stomachs and cause all kinds of issues. And so that type of thing, yes, that's good science. In terms in terms of whole body inflammatory effect, I'm not so convinced about that. I've not studied it in depth, so don't take my word for it. I think this is where you have to do an N=1 study. Is do you find that dairy products bother you? And if so, you need to stay away from them, or perhaps it's just the lactose in them. If you're lactose intolerant, and you can do a 23andMe genetic test, and you can find out. You could know 2 weeks from now whether you have that gene, variant that makes you lactose intolerant or likely to be lactose intolerant. There's still epigenetics involved, and so just because you have that variant doesn't mean you're going to be, but you likely are if you consumed enough. And there's a lot of other interesting things to discover if you do one of those genetic tests. I've done them. I have worked with athletes who have done them. I think there's some value in doing genetic testing. I could do another Trading Cafe on that maybe and share with you some of the results. It's a very interesting topic. I know some people aren't a fan of the whole concept of doing this, and that's fine. I don't want to get into that right now. Okay, recommendations on shoes. Well, shoes are hugely important. Now, if you're a beginner, your first year climbing, you just need a shoe that is comfortable so you can climb and not be in too much pain. But as you do become intermediate and start to advance your climbing, the shoe is extremely important. And I've been meaning to do a video on that. I'm a La Sportiva athlete. You can tell from my shirt. So I guess I got to state that up and forward. But before I was affiliated with La Sportiva as an athlete, I've been with them for 20 years. They make fantastic product. But I started wearing La Sportiva because they fit my foot better than any other shoe on the market in 1990, so 30 years ago. And so the number one thing is you need to find a shoe that fits your foot. Shoes are built on a last, which is like a plastic foot. And so what last a shoe is designed on will determine how wide it is and what the volume is and how asymmetric it is and just how your toes will fit. Our feet are all different. So you need to, if you're not a long-term climber and haven't really figured it out yet, you need to try shoes from different companies. If you have a more narrow side of the spectrum foot, then La Sportiva might really, really work for you well. And they have shoes that fit wider feet, but my sense is if you have kind of average to maybe a little narrower foot or smaller foot, the La Sportiva lasts are fantastic, and the designs are incredible. Now, there's different shoes for steep climbing and gym climbing and trad climbing and crack climbing. So you have to find the shoe that meets your preference. But the first thing is, what is the fit of the shoe? And so when I put on a La Sportiva Solution, for example, I pull it on my foot. It's like, because it just fits my foot so perfectly. And it's a lined shoe, so it doesn't really stretch that much. It molds a little bit the first few times you wear it, but it doesn't stretch and become sloppy. And so, getting a shoe that has a lining, to some degree with shoes, you get what you pay for. The shoes that are sub $100 tend to be made from cheap products that stretch and might fall apart pretty quickly. You buy an expensive shoe, like an Italian-made shoe that costs maybe nearly $200. You might be able to resole it several times, get several seasons out of it. It's likely going to be a lined shoe that doesn't stretch and just overall holds up way, way better. And there are shoes made outside of Italy that are very good as well. But again, the La Sportiva shoes are Italian made. So I would encourage you to check them out. And again, if the La Sportiva shoe fits, you need to go no further, in my opinion, when it comes to climbing shoes. But yeah, shoes are important. And by the way, final comment, when I go on a climbing trip, I take 3 or 4 different La Sportiva shoes with me because I like one shoe for warming up. I like one shoe for like vertical thin edge routes. I like a different shoe for steep routes. And maybe I'll do a video on that sometime and get into the science of why one shoe is better than others. But, as a beginner, probably you're just going to get one pair of shoes. But then as you advance, you want to think about maybe 2 different pairs of shoes for, indoor versus outdoor, and then maybe at some point even go to 3 or 4 different pairs of shoes as you become a specialist in different types of climbing. Okay, let me just check my time here. 12:41. Okay, I need to wrap this up in 5 or 10 minutes at the max. Okay, what is the minimum climbing woody size that could yield a good training session? My original woody that I built, I lived in a small townhouse 30 years ago when we were first married, and we built, it was basically an 8x8, so 2 4x8 plywood sheets with a little kicker board at the bottom. It was about 45 or 50 degrees past vertical. Scatter a bunch of small, medium, and large holds. And yes, it gets boring fast, but you can get a decent workout on. You can do, 3 to 4 move boulder problems, especially if you climb diagonally. If you put your feet on only small holds, you can get a good core workout. You can even do some boulder campusing where you just don't have shoes on and you just sit on the ground and do 4 campus moves in a row up the bouldering wall. So I would say 8x8 is the bare minimum. If you can go a sheet or 2 of plywood bigger, and also maybe even introduce my second wall that I built, then I introduced 2 angles. So I had something like this, where I had a steeper wall and then a less steep wall, because different angles, you're training especially your back and shoulder muscles are working, and your wrist stabilizers. There's a lot of nuance to climbing, and so if you're just training on a 45, you'll get really strong at that angle, but it doesn't perfectly translate. And so having different angles to train on, or if you make an 8x8 wall, there's ways that you can put a hinge at the bottom and then have a pulley system to change the angle. That would be something, if you're a bit of an engineer, that you could perhaps do. Should you breathe a certain way when climbing? Are there certain moments while before climbing, breathing techniques? Yeah, hugely important. I mean, if you watch Adam Andre do silence, now you're going to first notice he does a lot of screaming, but some of that is just focus and effort, but some of that is to force air out of his lungs, in and out of his lungs. Steep climbing, especially hard bouldering and steep climbing, you do have to do this Valsalva maneuver where you bear down, and hold your breath to contract maximally, to create core tension and power. And, on silence, he had to do that repeatedly, keep bearing down and holding breath for a few seconds to maybe even 5 seconds at a time. And so you can go anaerobic really fast when you're not breathing like that. And so the yelling helps drive the breathing process, because you can't hold your breath and yell at the same time. So that's part of the yelling, is it aids in effective breathing. But you can also develop breathing habits. Some people develop bad breathing habits. When they do a hard move, they hold their breath, and then when the hard move's over, they still hold their breath, maybe because of anxiety, like, okay, I'm waiting to get to the next good hold to start breathing again. That's bad. You don't want to do that. I call that kind of legacy breath holding. You hold it for a move, and then you keep holding it for several moves after that. So look out for that. Again, if you yell doing hard moves, well, then it's going to force you to breathe. So that prevents that legacy breath holding. I am conscious of breathing, but when you're focusing on the moves on a route, you can't be focusing on your breathing. It's just not how your brain works. If focus is narrowed to a pinpoint, then nothing else in the world matters except that move, that next hold. So you're not thinking about breathing. Now, when you get to the next rest position, then you can direct your focus inward. Take some deep belly breaths. Think about slowing down your breathing. Deep belly breaths. In through your nose, out through your mouth. And try to slow things down. Slow your breathing down, slow your heart rate down. That's if you're at a good rest that you can hang out. Or between boulders, or between exercises. You can go through that program. Breathing through your nose is very beneficial and helpful. A lot of people are mouth breathers, which tends to be a more shallow breathing. And we want to become deeper breathers to get more oxygen, more of your lungs filled with oxygen. So yeah, the whole breath play thing is hugely important when climbing near your limit, where oxygen matters. And so that's something, again, we could spend a whole podcast and talk about breathing techniques. Recently hurt my knee, bad fall bouldering. Well, that's a bummer. Yeah, knee injuries are increasingly common. Just even doing drop knees and heel hooks, people have stretched out ligaments or blown out their ACL or partially tore it, and then it tears the rest of the way when you jump off. And so this is something that you need to be aware of. Once the injury occurs, well, then, the first thing is to get an accurate diagnosis from a physician. That might include an MRI to see what the soft tissue damage is. A meniscus tear is a possibility, for knee pain as well. And then going through an appropriate rehab program, if required, get surgery. That's a longer duration comeback, but it's a comeback that many climbers have made. Shauna Coxey, Alex Puccio, people like that have had these knee injuries. They are actually more common in women because your hormone levels, as they change throughout the month, there's a brief period where you are more susceptible to connective tissue injuries due to that. So, female climbers should be actually extra aware of the concern for knee injuries, but ease back slowly. And I'm going to defer to a PT on advice on how fast to get back into climbing, because this is not my area of expertise. So Iggy, how often should I do weighted pull-ups? How fast should I increase the weight? I'm currently at 140%. Okay, man. Yeah, another few months or maybe a season, you'll be doing one-arm pull-ups. It sounds like, the progress you're making here, Iggy. I'm a big fan of the 5 sets of 5 protocol. And so, so you do a warm-up, you do some body weight pull-ups, you do some pull-ups with a little bit of added weight, and then you, after being warmed up and rested, you do 5 sets of 5 weighted pull-ups. And so you want to find a weight that you can, like your 7 or 8 rep max weight. For me, it's around 60 to 70 pounds. And I put that on and do 5 sets of 5 pull-ups with about a 3-minute break in between. Sometimes if I'm feeling really strong and I want to push it, I might do the first set at 60, the next set at 65, the next set at 70, the next set at 75, the next set at 80, and be adding a little bit of weight for each of the 5 sets. And when I do that, by the 5th set, I'm only maybe getting 3 reps rather than the full 5. But that's okay. That's a good strength training protocol as well. And 2 days per week is the ideal load, I think, for most people, or frequency for most people to do this. How fast should you increase the weights? Well, kind of let it be determined by your results of your training. If you get to the point where you're only doing 1 or 2 reps per set, then you have too much weight on and you need to ease up on the weight. If doing 5 sets of 5 is easy at whatever weight you're using, well, then you need to add some more weight. So you just kind of need to suss that out. And just 1 or 2 more questions, and then I need to run here. Another A2 pulley injury, Yuri. Resting 30 days now. Doctor recommended 60 before I get back into climbing. Yeah, here's the thing. If you go 30 or even 60 days with no loading of your fingers, that's not ideal. Once you get past the acute stage and once healing has started, you need to provide a stress signal to the tenocytes, the fibroblasts that are extruding collagen and remodeling your injured pulley. They need a signal to know how to align the connective tissue. So people that get these tendon ligament injuries, shoulders, knees, elbows, fingers, that just stop cold turkey everything, that's ill-advised. Certainly you need a time away. You need to, not do anything maximal for a long time, but to do some loading is helpful. So with these A2 pulley ruptures, and you say yours is partial rupture, maybe just 2 weeks of total rest, and then the next 2 weeks going, easing back into some very easy loading, and then week over week, very slowly ramping it up so that by 60 days, you might actually be fully back to climbing. But I would not go from 2 months of rest fully back into climbing. You need to progressively and slowly increase the loading on the connective tissues. And again, you can perhaps enhance or speed the healing by consuming a vitamin C enriched hydrolyzed collagen before each of your rehab sessions. And so if you go to physivantage.com, you can learn more about the science behind that, because it's pretty well documented that it works to help enhance rehab. Okay, I see that all men that climb at a high level are able to pull one-arm pull-ups. Is it an important skill? Well, it depends. Yes, if you look at the 515 climbers of the world, whether it's Stefano or Jakob or Alex or Adam or Jonathan, you name a 515 climber, or a V15 boulder, Drew Ruanas, Matt Foltz, Alex Puccio, even the females, Brooke Rabitu, they can all do one-arm pull-ups. So that level of strength, that one-arm power, I'd say it is pretty essential for that level of climbing. Now, for the massive climbers out there, people that are climbing, as weekend warriors or bouldering, and, far from being V15, 515 climbers, there's a lot more to climbing than just being able to do a one-arm pull-up. And there's a lot of people that can do one-arm pull-ups that can't boulder V10 or can't lead a 512 because they don't have the mental skills, the technical skills, and all the other important skills. So again, for a beginner or intermediate, or even someone that's near the advanced grades, it's not essential. But as you become more to the elite grades, then I think it becomes an essential thing. So for most climbers, you're doing weighted pull-ups for your strength training. Once you get to the point that you're adding maybe 50 to 75% of your body weight is being added, then you start working uneven grip one-arm pull-ups, and then eventually you can transition to one-arm pull-ups. But that takes years for most people to go through that progression. If you rush it, you may hurt a shoulder, develop elbow tendonitis, so you need to progress carefully. We all have unique genetics. And again, remember, there's a lot more to climbing than one-arm pull-ups. Gio says he loves the Bonatti quote on my email. Thank you so much. I love that quote too. What he's talking about is I have a emailing list for my company, PhysiVantage. If you go to physivantage.com, the emailing list gets you insider kind of training tips once a week, obviously access to sale events and things like that. So the shipping overseas is expensive and unfortunately slow because of COVID. So that's kind of tough for international climbers and customers. But if you live in North America, there's no issues. The orders go out same day and will arrive to you in 2 or 3 days. Folks, I'm sorry to say I need to end this broadcast. Thank you for joining me for coffee. Thank you for the continued feedback and kind words. Let's keep the Training Cafe growing. Please tell a friend. Please share the video. After the live stream is done, it's still viewable on demand on YouTube. Share the link with a friend. Come into my Training for Climbing YouTube channel, click subscribe, ring the bell, leave a comment, share with a friend. Let's grow this to being a international once a week meetup of people who love climbing, love training, and love coffee. Thank you for joining me. We'll see you next Monday. Take care.